The Vexory Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever refused their demands. No civilization had ever stood against their might. No world had ever survived their wrath when they chose to unleash. And I, Sovereign Kethril, stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on the view screen before him. This was Earth, the homeworld of the species called humanity. And today, it would learn to kneel like all the others before it. His fleet numbered 3,000 warships, each one capable of burning continents to ash and boiling oceans into vapor. Behind him stood admirals and generals who had crushed 100 rebellions and conquered 1,000 worlds. The Vexory were tall creatures with armored skin the color of dried blood, mandibles that clicked when they spoke, and eyes that had witnessed the death of empires. "Open a channel to the humans," Kethril commanded. His voice deep and ancient with the weight of centuries. His communications officer obeyed. And within moments, a human face appeared on the screen. She was small by Vexory standards, with messy dark hair and tired eyes, wearing what appeared to be a wrinkled jacket with a brown stain on the collar. She held a steaming cup of some liquid and seemed mildly annoyed at the interruption. "Human," Kethril began, letting his voice carry the full authority of his position. "I am High Sovereign Kethril of the Vexory Dominion, ruler of 4,000 star systems, commander of the greatest military force this galaxy has ever known. Your species has been judged, and you have been found worthy of a choice." He paused for effect, as he always did. This was the moment when lesser species began to tremble. "You will surrender your worlds, your resources, and your people to the Dominion. You will serve us as all species serve us. You will pay tribute in labor and materials for the rest of your existence. In return, we will allow you to live. This is the only offer you will receive. Refuse, and your civilization will be erased from history so completely that future species will never know you existed." The human woman stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned away from the screen and called out to someone off camera. "Hey, Marcus, come look at this. You're going to love it." Another human appeared, a tall man with gray hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He squinted at the screen, then at a datapad in his hand, then back at the screen. "Is that the ultimatum?" he asked. "Word for word," the woman replied. "Just like the archive said. They actually do the whole dramatic pause thing and everything." She turned back to Kethril, and to his absolute shock, she was smiling. Not a nervous smile, not a diplomatic smile, but the kind of smile a parent gives a child who has said something accidentally funny. "I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Where are my manners? I'm Ambassador Elena Vasquez, and this is my colleague Dr. Marcus Webb. We've actually been expecting you for about, 20 years now." Kethril's mandibles clicked in confusion. This was not how this conversation was supposed to proceed. "You have been expecting us?" He repeated. "Oh yes," Elena said, taking a sip from her cup. "We found records of your dominion in the ruins of the Kethvari civilization about 3 decades ago. Lovely people, by the way, very advanced. Shame what you did to them. Anyway, we've known you were coming ever since, and we've been very curious to meet you." She leaned forward, and her smile grew wider. "Now, I have to be honest with you, High Sovereign. I read your ultimatum out loud to my team, and we had a good laugh about it. Not to be rude, but we found the whole thing rather adorable. You come here with your big, scary ships and your threats of annihilation, and you expect us to just fall over and worship you." She chuckled, and the sound seemed to echo through the command deck of the Eternal Conquest. "That's adorable," she repeated. "Really, truly adorable. Hold on, let me get my supervisor. She's going to want to hear this." The screen flickered, and Elena Vasquez was replaced by another human. An older woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to look right through Kethril and into his soul. This one was not smiling. "High Sovereign," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I am Director Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Initiative. I understand you've made some demands. Let me make a counteroffer." "There are no counteroffers," Kethril growled, his patience wearing thin. "There is only submission or death." "Yes, well, that's exactly the kind of thinking we were hoping to discuss," Director Chun replied. "You see, your dominion operates on a very simple principle. You are powerful. Therefore, others must obey. It's worked for you for 10,000 years, and I'm sure it seems very logical from your perspective." She folded her hands in front of her. "But here's the thing, High Sovereign. We humans have a saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. You've conquered species that were peaceful, species that were unprepared, species that had never imagined violence on the scale you brought to their doorsteps." Her eyes narrowed. "We are not those species. We have spent our entire history fighting ourselves. We have developed weapons that could crack our own planet in half. We have survived plagues, famines, wars, and disasters that would have ended any other civilization. We are still here, and we are not impressed by your fleet." Kethril felt something he had not felt in centuries. Uncertainty. "You are bluffing," he said. But his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Perhaps," Director Chun replied. "Or perhaps you've made the worst mistake in the history of your dominion. Either way, I suggest you think very carefully about your next move. In the meantime, Ambassador Vasquez will send you some reading material. We find that education is often the best way to prevent unnecessary conflict." The screen went dark, and Kethril was left standing in silence around him. His admirals exchanged nervous glances. In 10,000 years, no species had ever responded to the Vexory ultimatum with laughter. No species had ever called them adorable. No species had ever offered them reading material. High Sovereign Kethril stared at the blue and green planet on his view screen, and for the first time in his long life, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. 3 days passed after the initial contact, and High Sovereign Kethril spent every moment of them studying the materials the humans had sent. What he found disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. The files contained histories, scientific papers, and something the humans called cultural archives. They showed a species that had spent its entire existence at war with itself. They showed weapons that could level cities in seconds, diseases engineered to kill millions, and conflicts that had nearly destroyed their entire civilization multiple times. But they also showed something else: survival. No matter what humanity threw at itself, no matter how close they came to extinction, they always found a way to continue. They adapted, they rebuilt, they grew stronger. His admirals dismissed the files as propaganda, designed to frighten and deceive. Grand Admiral Vexthos, his oldest friend and most trusted commander, was especially vocal in his contempt. "These humans are playing games with us," Vexthos declared, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "They show us pictures of their little wars and expect us to be impressed. They know nothing of true power. Let us show them what the Vexory can do." Kethril considered this. Perhaps his admiral was right. Perhaps the humans were simply trying to buy time with their strange confidence and their stranger files. There was only one way to know for sure. Very well, he said. "We shall give them a demonstration. Find me an uninhabited target in the system." The scanning officers worked quickly, and within minutes, they had identified a small moon on the outer edge of the solar system. It was a dead rock, barely 1,000 kilometers across, with no atmosphere and no signs of life. It would serve perfectly. "Lock primary weapons on the target," Kethril commanded. "Full power." The Eternal Conquest was the most powerful warship in the Vexory fleet. Its main cannon could shatter continents and boil oceans. It had destroyed hundreds of worlds over the centuries. And today it would show these arrogant humans the true meaning of Vexory might. The weapon charged, a deep hum filling the ship as energy built to catastrophic levels. On the view screen, targeting markers locked onto the distant moon. Every officer on the command deck held their breath. Fire. Catherall ordered a beam of pure destruction lanced across space. Bright enough to momentarily blind the sensors, powerful enough to reduce mountains to vapor. It crossed the vast distance in seconds and struck the moon with the force of 1,000. No clear explosions, and then something impossible happened. The beam did not destroy the moon. Instead, it seemed to splash against an invisible barrier, spreading across the surface like water hitting glass. Ripples of energy cascaded outward, brilliant and beautiful, and then simply faded away for a long moment. No one on the command deck spoke. What Catherall finally managed was that, before anyone could answer, a small structure flickered into existence on the moon's surface. It had been invisible before, hidden by some technology the Vexory scanners could not detect. Now it sat there openly. A compact installation with what appeared to be a large dish pointed directly at the fleet. A human figure appeared in the installation's window. The scanner zoomed in automatically, and Catherall saw a young man in casual clothing, holding a cup of something hot. The man waved at the fleet, then held up a small sign. The sign read, "Nice try." Catherall's communicator crackled to life. And Ambassador Vasquez's voice filled the command deck. "Good morning." "Hi, Sovereign," she said cheerfully. "I see you've discovered one of our monitoring stations. Sorry about the energy absorption field, but we really can't have you shooting holes in our solar system. It's untidy." "How did you do that?" Catherall demanded, his voice barely controlled. "That weapon can destroy planets. No shield technology in the galaxy can stop it." "Well, that's not entirely accurate," Vasquez replied. "No shield technology that you know about can stop it. You see, we've had 20 years to prepare for your arrival, and we've been very busy. That little station you just shot at was built by graduate students as a class project. It's powered by what we call a contained singularity, which is a fancy way of saying we put a tiny black hole in a box and made it do tricks for us." She paused, and Catherall could hear her sipping from her cup. "The energy from your weapon is already being converted into electricity. I believe young Thomas there is using it to heat his ramen noodles. Very efficient. Really, waste not, want not, as we say." Grand Admiral Vestos stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "This is impossible," he snarled. "These humans are primitives. They barely discovered faster than light travel a century ago. They cannot possess technology superior to ours." "Ah, that's a common misconception," Vasquez said, apparently able to hear everything on the command deck. "You assume that because we're young, we must be weak. You assume that because we don't have a galaxy-spanning empire, we must be primitive. You made a lot of assumptions." "Hi, Sovereign, and I'm afraid most of them were wrong." Her voice grew more serious. "You've conquered thousands of species, and you know what they all had in common. They were content. They were peaceful. They had no reason to develop weapons capable of ending their own existence. But we humans, we're different. We spent our entire history being afraid of each other. We built weapons that could destroy our own world, and we kept building them even after we knew how dangerous they were." She let that sink in. "When we finally reached the stars and found evidence of your dominion, we didn't panic, we didn't hide. We got to work. Every scientist, every engineer, every brilliant mind on Earth turned their attention to a single question. How do we survive what's coming? And we figured it out." The view screen flickered, and suddenly it showed a map of the solar system. Hundreds of red dots appeared. scattered across every planet, moon, and asteroid belt. Each dot represented a hidden installation, a weapon, a trap. Those are just the ones we're willing to show you, Vasquez said. The real defenses are elsewhere, and I'm afraid I can't tell. You where? Professional secrets and all that. Kethril stared at the map, his mind racing. If the humans were telling the truth, then his fleet was surrounded by weapons he could not see and could not fight. If they were lying, it was the most elaborate bluff in galactic history. What do you want? He finally asked. Now we're getting somewhere, Vasquez replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. I think it's time we had a real conversation, don't you? Face to face, no weapons, just talking. Director Chun would very much like to meet you in person. She promises not to laugh too much. High Sovereign Kethril, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, looked around at his admirals. He saw fear in their eyes for the first time in millennia. He saw uncertainty and confusion and the beginning of something that might have been respect. Very well, he said slowly. I will meet with your director. But I warn you, Ambassador, if this is a trap, my fleet will reduce your planet to ash. Oh, High Sovereign, Vasquez laughed. If we wanted to trap you, you would already be trapped. See you soon. The communication ended, and Kethril was left alone with his thoughts. Outside the viewport, the moon that should have been destroyed sat unchanged in the darkness of space, and somewhere on its surface, a graduate student named Thomas was eating ramen noodles heated by the power of a weapon that had killed billions. The shuttle that carried High Sovereign Kethril to the human diplomatic vessel was the finest in the Vexory fleet, decorated with gold and precious gems, designed to inspire awe in lesser species. But as it approached the human ship, Kethril found himself strangely nervous. The human vessel was small and plain, painted in simple gray with no markings or decorations. It looked more like a cargo transport than a diplomatic cruiser. And yet, knowing what he now knew about human technology, Kethril suspected that appearances were deceiving. His guards wanted to accompany him. But the humans had been clear. The High Sovereign alone, no weapons, no escorts. It was a sign of trust, they said. Or perhaps a test. Kethril was no longer certain which the airlock cycled open, and he stepped into the human ship. The interior was as plain as the exterior, with white walls and simple lighting. Ambassador Vasquez was waiting for him, still holding her ever-present cup of coffee. Welcome aboard the Resolution. High Sovereign, she said with a warm smile. I hope the trip wasn't too uncomfortable. Can I get you anything? Water, tea, something stronger perhaps. I require nothing. Kethril replied stiffly. Take me to your director. Vasquez shrugged and led him down a narrow corridor. They passed humans of all sizes and ages, some in uniforms and some in casual clothing. None of them seemed impressed or frightened by the presence of a Vexory. A few even nodded politely as they walked by. The conference room was small and simple, containing only a round table, several chairs, and a holographic projector in the center. Director Chun was already seated, her silver hair gleaming under the soft lights, her eyes sharp and watchful. High Sovereign, she said, gesturing to a chair. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Kethril lowered himself into the chair, which was surprisingly comfortable, despite being designed for smaller beings. Vasquez took a seat nearby, pulling out a datapad and setting it on the table. Before we begin, Director Chen said, I want to show you something. A bit of history, if you will. I think it will help you understand why we responded to your ultimatum the way we did. She activated the holographic projector, and an image of Earth appeared, floating above the table. It was beautiful, blue and green and white, alive with color. This is our home, Chun said. We've only had it for about 200,000 years, which I understand is very young by galactic standards. But in that short time, we've done remarkable things. The image shifted, showing ancient cities and primitive wars. Humans fighting with swords and spears, burning villages and conquering kingdoms. We started like most species, I suppose. Small tribes competing for resources, growing into nations, building empires. But unlike most species, we never stopped fighting. Every generation found new reasons to kill each other, new weapons to do it with, new ideologies to justify it. The images grew more terrible, trenches filled with bodies, cities in flames, mushroom clouds rising over devastated landscapes. In our 20th century, we developed weapons capable of destroying our entire civilization, Chun continued. A voice calm and measured. Not just one nation, not just one continent, but everything. We pointed these weapons at each other and dared our enemies to make the first move. We lived like that for decades, always one mistake away from extinction. Kethril watched in silence. He had seen war, had ordered the destruction of entire worlds, but there was something different about what the humans showed him. There was a desperation, a madness, that he had never encountered before. And then something strange happened, Chen said. We didn't destroy ourselves. We came close many times, but we always pulled back. We learned to live with the fear, to use it, to let it drive us forward. We took all that destructive energy and channeled it into something else. The images changed again, showing rockets launching into space, astronauts walking on the moon, probes sailing past distant planets. We reached for the stars because we knew that staying on one world meant eventual death. A single asteroid, a single plague, a single war could end everything we had built. So we spread out, slowly at first, then faster. We built colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. We sent generation ships to nearby stars. We did everything we could to ensure that no single disaster could wipe us out. She leaned forward, fixing Kethril with her piercing gaze, and then we found the ruins of the Kethvari. A beautiful civilization, advanced and peaceful, destroyed by your dominion 3,000 years ago. We found their records, their warnings, their desperate final messages to any species that might come after. And we knew that you would come for us eventually. Director Chun smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You see, High Sovereign, your dominion has conquered species that had never known war. Species that had never faced extinction. Species that had never looked into the abyss and survived. But we humans, we've been staring into the abyss our entire existence. We've seen the worst of what we can do to each other, and we're still here. She gestured, and the hologram changed one more time. Now it showed schematics, weapon systems, defense networks, technologies that made Kethril's eyes widen with disbelief when we knew you were coming. We didn't build a fleet, Chun said. Fleets can be destroyed. We didn't build an empire. Empires can be conquered. Instead, we built something else entirely. We made ourselves impossible to defeat. She pointed to different systems as she spoke. Every human colony is a fortress, hidden and defended by weapons you cannot imagine. Every human ship carries enough firepower to destroy a star. Every human citizen has their consciousness backed up on servers scattered across the galaxy. Even if you destroyed Earth, destroyed every human body in existence, we would still survive. We would still remember. And we would still come for you. Kethril felt cold. In 10,000 years of conquest, he had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that had prepared for the worst because they had already survived it. You threatened us with annihilation, Director Chun said quietly. But annihilation is something we've lived with our whole lives. It's not a threat to us. It's just Tuesday. She stood, and despite her small stature, she seemed to tower over the High Sovereign. So here's my question, Kethril. What do you want to do now? You can go back to your fleet and order an attack, and we will defend ourselves. Your ships will be destroyed. Your soldiers will die, and the Vexory Dominion will learn why the galaxy should fear humanity. Or you can sit here with me and talk about a different future. One where nobody has to die. She extended her hand, a human gesture of greeting and trust. The choice is yours, High Sovereign. But choose wisely. We've been waiting a long time for this moment, and we're very good at waiting. Kethro looked at her hand, then at her face. Then at the holographic display, still showing human weapons capable of unimaginable destruction. He thought about his fleet, his empire, his 10,000 years of conquest. And he thought about what it would mean to face an enemy that could not be broken, could not be frightened, could not be destroyed slowly, carefully. He reached out and took her hand. "Tell me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of future did you have in mind?" Director Chun smiled. And this time there was warmth in it. "I thought you'd never ask." The meeting with Director Chun had shaken Kethro to his core, but he was still the High Sovereign of the Vexory Dominion. He had not held power for 3 centuries by showing weakness or accepting defeat. When he returned to the Eternal Conquest, he called an emergency council of his admirals. "The humans have impressive technology," he admitted, standing before the assembled commanders. "But they are still only one species, one system. We have 3,000 ships and trillions of soldiers across the galaxy. I will not surrender to a species that was still living in caves when we conquered our first star." Grand Admiral Vexta stepped forward, his eyes burning with barely contained fury. At last, he growled, "The High Sovereign speaks with wisdom. These humans have insulted us long enough. Let us show them that the Vexory Dominion does not negotiate with prey." The other admirals murmured in agreement. They were warriors, bred for conquest, and the idea of backing down from a challenge was unthinkable. Even if the humans had powerful weapons, the Vexory had numbers, experience, and 10,000 years of military tradition. "Order the fleet to attack formation," Kethral commanded. "All weapons online. We will strike at their homeworld with everything we have. If their defenses are as strong as they claim, we will find the limits. If they are bluffing, this war ends today." The fleet moved into position, 3,000 warships forming a massive sphere around Earth. Weapons charged, shields powered up, fighters launched from their bays like swarms of angry insects. It was the largest attack force the Dominion had ever assembled in a single system. Enough firepower to burn 100 worlds on the command deck of the Eternal Conquest. Kethral watched the blue and green planet grow larger on his view screen. Somewhere down there, Ambassador Vasquez was probably sipping her coffee and making jokes. Somewhere down there, Director Chun was watching and waiting. "Begin the attack," he ordered. The fleet opened fire, and then everything went wrong. The first wave of energy weapons simply vanished, absorbed by invisible shields scattered throughout the system. The second wave met the same fate. By the third wave, the humans had stopped being passive ships, appeared from nowhere, materializing out of folded space like ghosts becoming solid. They were small compared to Vexory dreadnoughts, sleek and silver, moving with impossible speed and precision. They fired once, twice, and Vexory ships began to die. But it was not the kind of death Kethral expected. There were no explosions, no fires, no screaming crew members being blown into vacuum. Instead, the ships simply stopped working. Engines went dark, weapons went offline, life support continued but nothing else. The crews were alive, but helpless, trapped in metal coffins drifting through space. "What is happening?" Kethral roared, watching his fleet crumble around him. "They're teleporting our reactors out of our ships," a terrified officer reported. "They're just reaching in and taking them. We can't stop it. We can't even see how they're doing it." More human ships appeared, dozens of them, then hundreds. They danced through the Vexory formation like wind through leaves, untouchable and unstoppable. Every time Vexory guns tried to track them, they simply weren't there anymore. Having moved to a new position before the targeting systems could lock on, a flight of Vexory fighters found themselves caught in something strange. A bubble of distorted space where time moved differently. From their perspective, they were flying at full speed. From outside, they hung motionless in the void, frozen in mid-flight like insects trapped in amber. The flagship's communications officer turned pale. "Hi, Sovereign," he said, his voice trembling. "The ship's AI has been compromised. Something got into our systems. I don't know how." A moment later, every screen on the command deck flickered, and a pleasant human voice filled the air. "Good afternoon." "Hi, Sovereign," the voice said. "I'm Sarah, the artificial intelligence aboard the Resolution. I'm afraid I've taken control of your weapon systems. Don't worry, I've also disabled your self-destruct protocol so nobody does anything foolish. Director Chun asked me to let you know that she's ready to talk whenever you are." Cathrall stared at his view screen, watching his mighty fleet reduced to drifting hulks. In the space of 11 minutes, the greatest military force in the galaxy had been completely neutralized. Not destroyed, he realized with growing horror, just disabled. The humans had not killed a single Vexory they could have. He understood that now. They could have annihilated his entire fleet in seconds if they had wanted to. But they had chosen mercy instead, and somehow that was more terrifying than any display of destruction could have been grand. Admiral Vexthos drew his ceremonial blade. His face twisted with shame and rage. "I will not be captured by these creatures," he snarled, raising the weapon to his own throat. "I would rather die then." He froze mid-motion, unable to move. A soft hum filled the air around him, and his blade clattered to the floor. "Please don't do that," Sarah's voice said gently. "Director Chun would very much like to speak with you as well, Admiral. She thinks you might find the conversation enlightening." Cathrall looked around his command deck at the faces of his officers. He saw fear and confusion and something that might have been relief. They had expected to fight and die gloriously. Instead, they had been defeated without a single casualty on either side. His communicator activated, and Ambassador Vasquez's face appeared on the personal screen. "So," she said, still holding that same cup of coffee, ready to talk terms. There was no mockery in her voice, no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a simple question asked by someone who already knew the answer. "Yes," Cathrall said quietly, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "I am ready." "Good," Vasquez replied, "because Director Chun has a proposal for you. I think you're going to be very surprised by what she has to say. It's not what you expect. I promise you that." She smiled, and for the first time, Cathrall saw warmth in it. "You see, High Sovereign, we could destroy your fleet. We could wipe out your dominion. We could make the Vexory extinct, and nobody in the galaxy would blame us for it. But that's not who we are. We've done enough destroying in our history. We've learned that dead enemies can't become friends, and conquered peoples make lousy partners." She leaned closer to the screen. "We don't want to beat you, Cathrall. We want to change you. And I know that probably sounds worse right now, but trust me, you're going to thank us someday." The screen went dark, and Cathrall was left standing in the ruins of his ambitions. Around him, his officers waited for orders, but he had none to give. For the first time in 3 centuries, the High Sovereign of the Vexory Dominion had no idea what to do next outside the viewport. Human ships continued their graceful dance through the disabled fleet, checking on crews, delivering supplies, ensuring that no Vexory would suffer. They moved with purpose and compassion, and Cathrall realized that he had completely misunderstood what he was facing. These were not enemies who wanted to destroy him. These were something far more dangerous. These were humans, and they wanted to help. The surrender ceremony took place aboard the Resolution, in the same simple conference room where Kethril had first met Director Chun. There were no crowds, no media, no grand spectacle. Just a small gathering of humans and Vexory, sitting around a table like equals. Kethril had expected humiliation. He had expected to kneel, to beg, to watch his empire carved up and distributed among human governors. That was how the Vexory had always treated defeated enemies, and he assumed humans would do the same. He was wrong. Director Chen placed a single document on the table, written in both Vexory script and human English. It was not a surrender treaty. It was something she called a partnership agreement. "Let me be clear about what we're asking," Chen said, her voice calm and measured. "We don't want your territory. We don't want your resources. We don't want your people as slaves or servants. What we want is change." She pointed to different sections of the document as she spoke. "The Vexory Dominion will cease all conquest and expansion. You will grant autonomy to every species currently under your control. You will establish fair trading agreements instead of tribute systems. You will create courts to try war crimes and provide justice to those you've wronged." Kethril listened in silence, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was hearing. "In return," Chung continued, "humanity will share our technology with you. We will teach you how we built our defenses, how we created our weapons, how we learned to survive. We will help you transform from conquerors into partners, from an empire of fear into a civilization of equals." She leaned back in her chair. "It won't be easy. Changing 10,000 years of culture never is. But we believe it's possible, and we're willing to help." Grand Admiral Vexthos, sitting beside Kethril with his wrists unbound and his pride shattered, spoke for the first time since his capture. "Why?" he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "Why do this? You have the power to destroy us. Any other species would take revenge for the thousands of civilizations we've crushed. Why show us mercy?" Director Chun looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. "Because we've been you," she said simply. "Humans have built empires. We've conquered and enslaved and destroyed. We've committed atrocities that still haunt us centuries later. We know what it's like to be the monster, and we know what it takes to become something better." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph, placing it on the table. It showed a city in ruins, buildings shattered, smoke rising into the sky, bodies lying in the streets. "This is Hiroshima," she said. "In 1945, humans dropped a nuclear weapon on this city. 80,000 people died in seconds. It was not the first atrocity we committed, and it was not the last. But it was a turning point. It made us realize that we had the power to destroy everything we had ever built. And we had to choose whether to use that power or to become something new." She picked up the photograph and put it away. "We chose to become something new. It took us centuries, and we made many mistakes along the way. But we learned that destruction is easy and creation is hard. We learned that dead enemies can't grow, can't change, can't become friends. We learned that the only wars worth winning are the ones that end with nobody losing." Kethril stared at her, and for the first time, he saw not an enemy but a teacher. Not a conqueror but a guide. "You could have destroyed us," he said slowly, "but instead you're going to help us. And that's worse, isn't it? Because destruction ends things, but what you're proposing changes everything." Chun smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. "Now you're beginning to understand." The signing of the partnership agreement was quiet and solemn. Kethril pressed his claw to the document, and just like that, 10,000 years of Vexory conquest came to an end. Not with fire and blood, but with ink and promise in the days that followed. Human ships began escorting Vexory vessels to the far reaches of the Dominion. They carried teachers and diplomats, engineers and artists, philosophers and healers. They brought with them books and music, science and poetry, all the accumulated wisdom of a species that had learned to survive itself. It was not easy. Kethril had known it would not be easy. The Vexory military commanders resisted at first, unable to accept that their way of life was ending. The conquered species were suspicious and angry, demanding revenge that the humans refused to allow. There were protests and riots, assassination attempts and rebellions, but slowly, gradually, things began to change. The first generation of Vexory children to grow up under the new system were different from their parents. They had human teachers alongside Vexory ones, learning history and ethics, philosophy and compassion. They questioned the old ways, challenged the old assumptions, built new friendships with species their ancestors had enslaved. Kethril watched these changes with a mixture of wonder and grief. Wonder at what his people were becoming, grief for the empire he had lost. But as the years passed, the grief faded, replaced by something that felt almost like hope 50 years after the surrender. He stood on a stage at the University of Mars, looking out at a sea of faces. Humans and Vexory sat side by side, along with representatives from dozens of other species. They had come to hear him speak, to learn from the former conqueror, who had become one of the galaxy's most respected teachers. "I want to tell you a story," he began, his voice amplified through the great hall. A story about a species that ruled the galaxy through fear. A species that believed power was the only thing that mattered. A species that threatened humanity and received something it never expected in return. He paused, his mandibles clicking in what his students had learned to recognize as a smile. The humans have a saying, "If you want peace, prepare for war." I used to think I understood what that meant. I thought it meant building bigger weapons, stronger ships, more terrible armies. I was wrong. He looked out at the crowd, at the young faces eager to learn, at the old faces that remembered the dark times. The humans didn't prepare for war. They prepared for everything. They prepared to be attacked, but they also prepared to survive. They prepared to fight, but they also prepared to forgive. They prepared to win, but they also prepared to help their enemies become something better. He spread his arms wide, encompassing the great hall, the university, the planet, the galaxy that had been transformed by human wisdom and human mercy. When my empire tried to threaten humanity, they didn't cower. They didn't beg. They didn't even get angry. Do you know what they did? He paused again, letting the silence stretch. They chuckled. They laughed at us, not because they were arrogant, but because they knew something we didn't. They knew that the universe is vast and full of dangers, and that the only way to truly survive is to help each other. They knew that empires built on fear will always crumble, but civilizations built on cooperation can last forever. He lowered his arms and looked directly into the recording cameras that would broadcast his words across the galaxy. "I used to be a conqueror. Now I am a teacher. I used to destroy civilizations. Now I help build them. And I owe everything I have become to a species of small, fragile creatures who refuse to be afraid of me." His mandibles clicked one final time. That is why, when anyone asks me about the humans, I tell them the truth. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they can destroy you, but because they can make you want to be better. And that is a power greater than any weapon ever built. The applause that filled the hall sounded like thunder, like hope, like the future finally arriving. And somewhere in the crowd, an elderly human woman with silver hair smiled and raised her coffee cup in a silent toast. The galaxy had changed, and it was just the beginning.